Okay, so I want to try to figure out how Canadians are feeling about immigration right now.
Seems like a pretty hot topic these days.
Yeah, for sure. Lots to unpack. So we have this recent Ledger poll. It was published by the National Post.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one.
Yeah, we found this like super interesting Reddit thread. Bunch of people reacting to the poll.
Ooh, so we get the numbers, A&D, what people are actually saying. I like it.
Right. Get the whole picture. It's kind of the point of these deep dives, right? Not just the stats, but like what are people actually experiencing and feeling?
It's fascinating to connect those dots. Like, what's the story behind the numbers?
Totally. And just to get us started, there were some pretty wild findings in this poll. Like, get this, almost AFF of Canadians, like, they actually support mass deportation to deal with illegal immigration.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and a full 65% think Canada's just letting in way too many illegal immigrants. And that's a massive jump from just a few years ago.
That's a huge shift. It does make you wonder, like, what's going on that would cause such a dramatic change?
Right. What's driving it? So let's break down those numbers a bit. That 48% who support mass deportation, that's, sending people back to where they came from, sometimes whole groups at once. I mean, it's a pretty intense topic.
Yeah, no kidding. And 65% saying Canada is accepting too many immigrants. I mean, think about it. Back in 2019, it was only 35% who felt that way.
Yeah, huge difference. What do you think's behind all this?
Well, the article mentioned a few things. The economy is a big one. Like housing costs are just insane for a lot of Canadians right now. And some people feel like, immigrants are making the competition for jobs even tougher.
Yeah, I can see that. Like when things were already tight, any extra pressure makes people uneasy.
Exactly. And the whole political climate matters too. The pollster actually suggested that all the debates in the U.S. about immigration, they could be having an impact on Canadians too.
Yeah, especially with everything that's been happening down there lately.
Right. So it's not just happening in a vacuum.
Okay, so we've got the numbers. Let's get into what Canadians are actually saying. This Reddit thread, it's pretty amazing. It's like a window into people's lives and what they're going through.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how these personal stories match up with what we're seeing in the poll. Like, do they support the numbers or, maybe challenge them a bit?
Right, so one thing that really jumped out were all these stories from Canadians who are struggling to find jobs, especially in fields that are now, like, dominated by new immigrants. There's this real sense of frustration, like things are changing too fast and they're being left behind.
Yeah, I can see how that would be unsettling. I mean, economic anxiety is definitely understandable. But it's important to remember that the connection between immigration and jobs, it's complicated. Some economists argue that immigrants actually help the economy. They fill those jobs nobody else wants, and they can bring new ideas that lead to innovation.
Interesting. It makes you think it might not be as simple as some people make it sound, the whole immigrants are taking our jobs thing.
Exactly. There's nuance there. It's not just a simple equation.
Yeah, for sure. We also saw a lot of stories about language barriers, people coming from different cultures, and sometimes there's just a lack of understanding. Some people talked about feeling like strangers in their own communities, especially in places where the population has changed really quickly.
That makes sense. It takes time for people to adjust, right?
Mm.
Integration's a process. It requires effort from both newcomers and people who've lived there for a long time. But these stories definitely highlight how easy it is to have misunderstandings when people come from such a different backgrounds.
Another theme that popped up a lot was worry about exploitation, like employers taking advantage of new immigrants because they might be willing to work for lower wages or under worse conditions.
That's a really important point. It raises questions about fairness and making sure everyone is treated equally. I mean, some people argue this can create a race to the bottom where, wages and living standards drop for everybody.
Yeah, not just for the new immigrants themselves.
Right. Everyone's affected.
We also saw some interesting contrasts. Like you'd have older immigrants who came to Canada, years ago, and they talk about how hard it was for them to get in, all the hoops they had to jump through. And now they feel resentful because they think it's become too easy for people to immigrate these days.
Right. Like they went through all this, and now it seems like the rules don't even matter anymore.
Yeah, and that ties into the idea of a rigged system, which also came up in the poll. Like this perception that some people are getting a free pass while others have to play by the rules definitely breeds resentment.
Yeah. You can see why people would be upset about that.
And then there were a ton of comments about people basically taking advantage of the system, using fake student visas or asylum claims just to get into Canada. Just feeds this whole idea that people are cutting corners.
It makes sense that people would be frustrated if they feel like the system's being abused. It erodes trust, not just in the immigration system itself, but also in the government's ability to manage it effectively.
Yeah, like if you're not even going to enforce the rules, why have them in the first place?
Exactly.
And it's not just about jobs in the economy either.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of comments from people worried about the strain on things like healthcare and schools. Like, can Canada handle this much growth without things getting worse for everyone? Hospitals overflowing, classrooms packed.
Yeah, that's a legitimate concern. I mean, if we're not building enough housing, investing in our healthcare system, making sure our schools can handle the influx of new students, then everyone feels the pressure.
It's a lot to think about. So we've got all these personal stories. Do you think they're representative of what's going on in Canada more broadly? Do they reflect those big trends we saw in the poll?
It's tough to say for sure without, like, more data. But I mean, these stories definitely echo a lot of the anxieties and concerns that are driving that big shift in public opinion we talked about. It's like we're seeing a snapshot of a society that's grappling with change, trying to figure out how to manage it all.
Yeah, and what could happen if this keeps going on? If these feelings just keep getting stronger, where could all of this lead?
That's the big question, isn't it? Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Like, what happens if these feelings keep getting stronger? Where could this lead?
Yeah, it's kind of a scary thought, actually.
Well, I mean, if this trend keeps going, I could definitely see Canada becoming a lot less open and welcoming to newcomers.
Like less friendly to immigrants?
Yeah, and it could even, lead to stricter immigration policies, like
Mm.
make it way harder for people to even get here.
Even if they'd have a lot to offer Canada.
Exactly. And I think that would be a pretty big change for a country that's usually seen as a model of diversity and inclusion, welcoming people from all over.
Totally. Like, Canada's so nice.
Right, exactly. And I think it could have some really negative consequences too, like fuel more discrimination and prejudice, create this atmosphere of fear and mistrust.
Yeah, no, it's not good.
It's easy to forget that this isn't just some political issue we're talking about. This is about real people's lives.
Yeah, real people with real hopes and dreams.
Exactly. And it's not like the poll was all doom and gloom either.
Oh, right. Yeah, it wasn't all negative.
There were definitely some nuances in there that I thought were pretty interesting. For example, like, even among the people who are worried about high immigration levels, most of them still said they believe immigrants make Canadian culture richer.
So it's not that they're like anti-immigration across the board.
Right.
More like they're trying to figure out, like, what's the right balance?
Yeah. Like, how do we balance being welcoming with also making sure things work for the people who are already here?
Makes sense.
And there was a split on the economic impact, too. The poll said that 49% believe immigrants are good for the economy, but then 40% thought they were taking jobs away from Canadians.
Okay, so almost half and half.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's a debate that's been going on forever, right? Like, on the one hand, some people focus on how immigrants fill gaps in the workforce, how they can bring new ideas and spark innovation. But then others are worried about what it means for wages and if our social safety net, like healthcare and all that, can handle all the extra people.
Sounds complicated. Like, there's no easy answer.
Yeah, because immigration has both benefits and challenges. And, like, how it all shakes out can really depend on a bunch of things. Like, what skills are those immigrants bringing? How well are they integrating into society? What's the overall economic climate looking like?
So how do we deal with all these, like, opposite opinions? How do we acknowledge, the anxiety people are feeling, but
Yeah.
also recognize that immigration can be a good thing for Canada?
I think the first step is to just talk about it, like have real conversations about immigration.
Okay, so more open and honest dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Exactly. And to really acknowledge how complicated it is and avoid, like, those simplistic narratives, the sound bites we hear all the time.
Right, like it's not black and white.
Exactly. There's so much gray area. We also need to get at the root of those economic anxieties people are feeling. Like, how do we make housing more affordable? How do we make sure everyone has access to good jobs? Things like that.
So it's more than just immigration policy, right? It's like a whole bunch of interconnected things.
Right. And then at the same time, we need to be supporting programs that help newcomers integrate successfully into Canadian society.
So it's a two-way street.
Totally. And I think part of making that work means making sure the immigration system itself is fair and transparent. We've got to address those concerns about queue jumping, make sure the process is tough, and that it's the same for everyone, no matter where they're coming from.
So no shortcuts or special treatment.
Exactly. Everyone's got to play by the same rules.
And this brings us back to the Reddit thread. All those comments about the government dropping the ball,
Right.
like they need to step up and do more.
There's a lot of frustration about how the immigration system is being managed. People feel like the government has made mistakes, and now we're dealing with the consequences.
So they want to see some changes.
Big changes, like Tons of people were saying we need stricter enforcement of visa rules, and if someone overstays their welcome, deport them.
Wow, that's pretty hardcore.
Yeah. But it's like they're saying, look, if you don't follow the rules, there have to be consequences.
Yeah, actions have to have consequences. Can't just let things slide.
Exactly. And some people even suggested, get this, hitting pause on immigration entirely.
Whoa, really? Like
Yeah.
completely shut it down?
Yeah, at least for a while. Just to give the country time to catch up and deal with all these problems.
Wow, that's a pretty drastic step.
It is. But I think it shows just how worried and frustrated people are feeling. And it brings up some really tough questions, like what policies can we actually put in place to try and fix things? What are the potential consequences, both good and bad, of taking different approaches? Like, what if we had a points-based system, where we prioritize immigrants with skills that are in high demand? Or maybe investing more in programs that help newcomers integrate into the workforce and society faster?
Yeah, there are lots of options.
There are, but it's not a simple fix. Immigration policy is incredibly complex.
Hmm.
Any changes we make are going to have ripple effects, across society, the economy, everything. We really have to weigh the pros and cons carefully. Think about the long-term impact and how it affects everyone. Not just the newcomers, but the people who are already here too.
So basically, Canadians are trying to decide what kind of country they want to live in.
Yeah, that's it exactly.
Yeah.
Do they want to stay open and welcoming or start to close off a little bit?
It's like a crossroads moment. We've got this tension between wanting to be welcoming and also wanting to make sure this system works for everyone who's already here.
It's about finding that balance. And it's interesting because even with all the worries and complaints we've been talking about, there's still this underlying belief that Canada should be a welcoming nation.
Yeah, it's
Like a balancing act, right?
Yeah, how do we juggle all of this?
And it's interesting because, even with all the worries and all the complaints that we've been talking about, there's still this underlying belief in being a welcoming nation, being Canadian.
That's like people saying, we want to be welcoming, B-U-T.
Exactly. But we want to make sure it's done right, that it's fair.
And that it actually works. And that's where all those tough questions about policy come in.
Right.
And enforcement. Like,
Yeah.
how do you actually make all of this work in practice?
Yeah. Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where we can keep those values of openness and diversity, but also deal with the very real concerns that people have because this is affecting their lives.
Right, this isn't theoretical.
No, this is the real deal for a lot of people.
Okay, so big picture, we've seen this huge shift in how Canadians are feeling about immigration. It's this mix of economic anxieties, worries about culture changing, and then this feeling that the system's just not fair.
That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it is. And it's not like there are easy answers.
Definitely not. It's complicated. But I think understanding all the different pieces of this, the personal stories, what the economists are saying, what's happening politically, all of that, that's how we start to find solutions that actually work.
Solutions that work for everyone, not just newcomers, but people who've been here their whole lives too.
Absolutely. Everyone needs to feel like they're being heard and that their concerns are taken seriously.
And that brings me to something I was thinking about. With all this unease about immigration, if that keeps going up, how do you think that's going to change Canada? Long term, what happens to society? What happens to politics?
Ooh, that's a good question. Big picture stuff, huh?
Yeah, is this going to make Canada a more insular kind of place? Or will we find a way to deal with these worries and still stay true to being diverse and inclusive? Those have always been a part of, what Canada's about.
Right, that's part of our identity.
Yeah. And I guess for all of us listening, it makes you think about, what role do we play in all of this? What can we do?
That's a good point. It's not just about the government or some far-off policy. It's about us, too.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the fear or the anger, but I think we all have a responsibility to try and be understanding,
Yeah.
to listen to each other.
Yeah, even if we don't agree with each other.
Right, even then. Because I think that's how we create a Canada that's still a place of hope and opportunity for everyone.
Nicely said. I like that.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up. This has been a really fascinating conversation. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's clear this is a conversation that's going to keep going.
Oh, yeah, it's not going away anytime soon.
Definitely not. So yeah, keep thinking about it, keep learning, keep talking to each other. It's important. Thanks for listening.